I never imagined that not speaking a language would make me unworthy of standing beside my own daughter on the most important day of her life. Yet that was exactly what happened. My daughter banned me from attending her Paris wedding because I don't speak French. And in that moment, after everything I had sacrificed, I made a decision that changed both of our lives forever. I canceled the $150,000 payment that was funding her dream wedding. To understand how it came to this, you have to understand who I am, and who my daughter was to me. My name is Caspian Wells. I'm 58 years old, a business consultant based in Denver, Colorado. For most of my adult life, I did everything right. I built a career from the ground up, paid my taxes, treated people fairly, and above all else, devoted myself to my family. My wife, Catherine, was the center of our home. She was kind, principled, and strong in a quiet way. When she passed away 12 years ago after a long illness, my world collapsed overnight. Victoria was 17 at the time. From that day forward, it was just the two of us. I became both parents overnight. I learned how to show up to school events, parent-teacher meetings, late-night study sessions, and emotional breakdowns. I worked longer hours to make sure she never felt the financial strain of losing her mother. I told myself that if I could protect her from hardship, then maybe the loss wouldn't scar her the way it scarred me. Every decision I made revolved around one question: what's best for Victoria? I paid for private schooling, language camps, study abroad programs. When she discovered a love for French culture and language, I encouraged it fully, even though I didn't understand a word of it myself. I worked overtime so she could attend summer programs in Europe. I never complained. I never said no. Watching her succeed felt like honoring Catherine's memory. Victoria grew into a brilliant, ambitious woman. By 29, she was fluent in 3 languages and working as a professional French translator. She moved comfortably in circles far more sophisticated than the ones I came from. I was proud of her. Immensely proud. When she met Jean-Baptiste, everything seemed to fall into place. He was French, successful, polished. An investment banker from a well-connected family. When she told me they were engaged in planning a wedding in Paris, I felt nothing but joy. A chateau overlooking the Seine. Elegant guests. A fairy tale ceremony. When she asked if I could help financially, I didn't hesitate. I offered $150,000 without being asked for a specific number. To me, it was a gift. A father's final contribution to his daughter's happiness. I had already transferred $80,000 for deposits and retainers. The remaining $70,000 was scheduled for the following week. Then came the email. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I had woken up early, brewed coffee, and stood at my kitchen window watching the sunrise over the Rocky Mountains. Life felt calm. Settled. I was thinking about how far Victoria had come. Her name appeared in my inbox. No subject line. That should have been my first warning. I opened it expecting a wedding update. Seating arrangements. Travel details. Anything but what I read. She wrote that Jean-Baptiste's family had concerns. They didn't want me at the wedding because I don't speak French. They felt it would be embarrassing to have someone who couldn't participate in conversations. To spare everyone discomfort, she suggested I watch the ceremony via livestream. A Google Meet link would be provided. The financial arrangements, she added, would remain the same. I read it again. And again. My daughter had just told me that I was not welcome at her wedding. Not because I had done something wrong. Not because of conflict or distance. But because I wasn't sophisticated enough. Not cultured enough. Not French enough. But my money? That was still perfectly acceptable. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't call her immediately. Instead, something quiet and heavy settled in my chest. A realization so sharp it took my breath away. I had been reduced to a wallet. A funding source. A background figure who could be hidden away behind a screen so as not to embarrass her new family. The cruelty wasn't loud. It was surgical. Should be just like being there, she had written. As if watching my only child get married through a computer screen was equivalent to walking her down the aisle. As if 12 years of sacrifice could be replaced with a live stream link. The irony cut deeper than she could possibly understand. Victoria made her living helping people bridge language barriers. Her entire career was built on communication, inclusion, and cultural sensitivity. Yet she was using my inability to speak French as a reason to exclude me from the most important moment of her life. I sat there staring at my cold coffee, thinking about all the years I had spent working late so she could afford lessons I never had time to take. The weekends I skipped. The vacations I postponed. The life I put on hold. Had I been funding my own rejection all along? I opened the wedding spreadsheet I had been maintaining. Every expense was neatly listed. Venue deposit. Catering. Photography. Flowers. $80,000 already gone. $70,000 more pending. $150,000 for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. I closed my laptop and looked out the window again. The mountains hadn't changed. The sun was still shining. But something inside me had broken quietly and permanently. That morning, I learned the difference between being loved and being used. I spent the rest of the day replaying the email in my head. Every word felt intentional. Not a suggestion. Not a compromise. A decision already made, presented as a courtesy. They didn't ask if I wanted to learn some French. They didn't suggest a translator. They didn't care how it would make me feel. They simply didn't want me there. That night, I sat in my study, staring at a framed photograph of Catherine on the bookshelf. I imagined what she would have said if she were still alive. She had always believed in kindness, but she never tolerated disrespect. Not from strangers. Not from family. Don't let guilt make you weak, she had told me once during her illness. Love her, but don't let her become entitled. Had I failed at that? For years, I had confused generosity with good parenting. I thought saying yes meant love. I thought protecting Victoria from consequences meant protecting her from pain. In reality, I had taught her that my role was to give, and her role was to take. The next day, I walked into my bank. I met with Charles Morrison, my private banking advisor of 15 years. I told him I needed to cancel the letter of credit for the Paris wedding vendors. He looked surprised but didn't question my decision. He explained that since I was the guarantor, not the contracting party, I had every right to revoke it. The remaining $70,000 would not be paid. The vendors would be notified immediately. If Victoria and her fiancé couldn't cover the costs, the contracts would be void. I signed the papers calmly. As I left the bank, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not satisfaction. But dignity. The days that followed were strangely normal. Victoria called me daily, excitedly updating me about floral arrangements, menus, photographers flying in from Milan. She had no idea what was coming. On Monday, the payment deadline passed. By Wednesday, my phone rang. She was panicked. Vendors were calling. The chateau was threatening cancellation. She demanded I call the bank and fix it. That was when I told her the truth. I had canceled the payment. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. She pleaded. She backtracked. She said I could come to the wedding. She said they could make arrangements. She blamed my partner. She accused me of betrayal. I reminded her of her email. I had promised to pay for a wedding I was invited to attend. She had uninvited me. I simply stopped paying for my own exclusion. 2 days later, the engagement was called off. Jean-Baptiste's family withdrew entirely. The wedding collapsed. The fairy tale dissolved. Victoria lost more than a ceremony. She lost the illusion that love and money are the same thing. In the months that followed, she struggled. Financially. Professionally. Personally. For the first time in her adult life, she faced consequences without a safety net. We didn't speak for 6 months. When I think back now, I don't feel pride in her pain. But I don't feel guilt either. Sometimes the hardest lesson a parent can teach is that respect is not optional. Not even from family. I didn't destroy my daughter's wedding. I simply stopped paying for my own erasure. And in doing so, I finally honored both myself and the values my wife tried to teach us long ago. Some lessons come late. But they still matter. And sometimes, love means walking away so the other person can finally learn to stand on their own. 6 months passed in a way I never could have imagined. Life didn't explode. It didn't collapse either. It simply recalibrated. The noise that had once surrounded my days slowly faded, replaced by a calm I hadn't realized I was missing. Victoria and I didn't speak during that time. Not a text. Not a call. At first, the silence felt unbearable. She was my only child. For nearly 3 decades, every routine in my life had been shaped around her needs, her goals, her emergencies. Now there was nothing but quiet. But as weeks turned into months, I began to understand something uncomfortable and liberating at the same time. The silence wasn't punishment. It was space. Through extended family, I learned pieces of what had happened after the wedding collapsed. Victoria had moved out of her luxury apartment and into a smaller place across town. She picked up part-time work at a language institute while rebuilding her freelance translation business. For the first time, she was budgeting carefully. Saying no to herself. Living within limits she hadn't known existed. I felt no satisfaction in hearing that. But I also didn't rush to fix it. Sarah noticed the change in me before I did. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains, she said, "You seem lighter. Like you're not carrying something anymore." She was right. For years, I had carried guilt disguised as responsibility. Fear disguised as love. I had been so afraid of losing my daughter that I never required her to treat me with basic respect. Letting go of that fear didn't make me heartless. It made me honest. My business flourished in ways I hadn't expected. Without constant financial emergencies and emotional crises, I focused more clearly. Clients noticed. Colleagues respected the way I handled my personal life when rumors inevitably spread. Not one person told me I had gone too far. Most said something far more revealing. I wish I'd had the courage to do that with my own kids. 3 weeks after the parking lot confrontation, Victoria showed up at my office building. Security called to ask if I wanted to see her. I said no. That decision hurt more than canceling the money ever did. But boundaries only work if you keep them. Later that evening, she sent an email. Not accusatory this time. Not dramatic. Just quiet. She wrote that she finally understood why I had done what I did. That living without my support had forced her to confront parts of herself she didn't like. That she had confused independence with superiority, and sophistication with worth. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask to come home. She just said she was sorry. I didn't reply immediately. I sat with that email for a long time, reading it over and over, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Forgiveness is complicated. It isn't a switch you flip. It's a process that requires honesty on both sides. When I finally wrote back, my message was simple. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped she continued building her life on her own terms. And I told her that if we were ever to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be based on mutual respect, not obligation. She agreed. We're not close again. Not yet. Maybe we never will be in the way we once were. But something healthier has replaced what we lost. There are no expectations now. No financial ties. No unspoken debts. Just 2 adults learning how to speak to each other honestly for the first time. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that email she sent me. The one that changed everything. I no longer feel anger when I remember it. I feel clarity. Because that moment forced me to choose between being a father who was loved and a father who was useful. I chose myself. And in doing so, I finally taught my daughter the lesson I should have taught her years ago. That love without respect is not love at all. That generosity without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And that sometimes, the most meaningful gift a parent can give isn't money, protection, or sacrifice. It's the courage to say no. I didn't lose my daughter that day. I lost the illusion that love means limitless giving. What remains is quieter, slower, and far more real. And for the first time in a long time, I can live with that. A year has passed now. Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges, not by erasing what happened, but by putting it into perspective. The pain doesn't disappear. It just stops controlling every thought. Life settles into something steadier, more grounded. Victoria and I speak occasionally. Short conversations. Careful ones. No pretending that everything is fine. No rewriting history. We don't talk about the wedding anymore. We don't need to. That chapter closed the moment the payment was canceled, and neither of us has tried to reopen it. She's different now. Not softer, not broken, but humbler. When she talks about her work, there's less arrogance in her voice and more gratitude. She no longer assumes success is guaranteed or that someone else will always catch her if she falls. She tells me about small victories instead of grand plans. Paying rent on time. Keeping a steady client. Saying no to things she can't afford. Those conversations matter more than she probably realizes. I've learned something about myself too. For years, I thought being a good father meant absorbing disrespect silently. I thought dignity was something you sacrificed for love. I was wrong. Dignity is what makes love sustainable. Without it, relationships rot quietly until all that's left is resentment and obligation. Sarah once asked me if I ever regretted canceling the money. I told her the truth. I regret that it had to come to that. I regret that my daughter learned such an important lesson through loss instead of understanding. But I don't regret the decision itself. Because for the first time, I chose not to disappear for someone else's comfort. There are moments when I imagine how that wedding would have looked. The chateau. The music. The vows spoken in a language I don't understand. And then I imagine myself sitting at home, watching my own daughter get married on a screen, smiling politely while pretending it didn't hurt. That version of me no longer exists. What replaced him is quieter, firmer, and far more honest. I didn't teach my daughter cruelty. I taught her consequences. I didn't withdraw love. I withdrew money that was being used as a substitute for respect. And in doing so, I finally respected myself. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it again. Yes. Not because it was easy. Not because it felt good. But because it was necessary. Family loyalty doesn't mean self-destruction. Love doesn't require humiliation. And being a parent doesn't mean you stop being a human being with boundaries. I didn't cancel a wedding out of spite. I canceled my role as a silent sponsor in my own erasure. And that decision, painful as it was, gave both my daughter and me something we didn't have before. A chance to rebuild on truth instead of entitlement. A chance to understand that respect is not a gift you receive automatically. It's something you earn, protect, and sometimes demand. That was the real lesson. And it was worth every dollar. Even now, there are days when the memory returns without warning. A song in French playing softly in a cafe. A photograph of Paris scrolling past on my phone. A wedding invitation from someone else's mailbox. Each time, there's a brief tightening in my chest, a reminder of what could have been. But the feeling passes. Because I know something now that I didn't know before. Loss doesn't always mean something was taken from you. Sometimes it means something false was stripped away. Before all of this, I lived with an unspoken fear. The fear that if I stopped giving, I would stop being needed. That if I set boundaries, I would be abandoned. It's a quiet fear many parents carry, especially those who raise children alone. We convince ourselves that our value lies in our usefulness, in what we provide, in how much we're willing to endure. I mistook sacrifice for love. Victoria didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt me. That truth took time to accept. Her behavior didn't come from cruelty alone. It came from a worldview I had helped create. A world where Dad always fixed things. Where consequences were optional. Where money smoothed over discomfort and erased mistakes. When she told me I was too embarrassing to attend her wedding, she wasn't trying to destroy me. She genuinely believed I would understand. That I would quietly accept it. That I would continue playing my role without question. That realization hurt more than the email itself. Because it forced me to see my own reflection in her assumptions. I had trained her to believe that my dignity was negotiable. The hardest part of standing firm wasn't losing access to her life. It was resisting the urge to rescue her when she struggled afterward. Every instinct in me wanted to step in. To write a check. To smooth things over. To make the discomfort disappear. But growth doesn't happen in comfort. Weeks after the engagement ended, I received a handwritten letter from Victoria. Not an email this time. A real letter. The paper was creased, the handwriting uneven. She wrote about how isolated she felt when everything collapsed. How quickly people disappeared when the money and status vanished. How embarrassed she was to realize she'd measured her worth by approval she didn't earn. She wrote about the night she sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts she could no longer return, and finally understood what I must have felt reading her email. I thought sophistication meant being above people, she wrote. I didn't realize it meant knowing how to treat them. I didn't frame that letter. I didn't show it to anyone. But I kept it. Because it told me something important. The lesson had landed. Our relationship today is slower. More careful. There are no grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. Just small, honest moments. Conversations where neither of us pretends to be something we're not. She doesn't ask for money. I don't offer it. We talk about work, about books, about the weather in Paris and the snow in Denver. And sometimes, quietly, about her mother. Catherine would have wanted this version of us. Not perfect. Not painless. But real. I used to believe that being a good father meant always being available. Always stepping in. Always cushioning the fall. Now I understand something different. Being a good father sometimes means stepping back and letting your child feel the ground beneath their feet. Not to punish them, but to prepare them. I didn't cancel a wedding to prove a point. I canceled a pattern that was slowly erasing me. I chose self-respect not because I stopped loving my daughter, but because I loved her enough to stop lying to both of us. Some stories end with reconciliation and celebration. Others end with clarity and boundaries. This one ended with something quieter, but far more enduring. Truth. And that, I've learned, is the foundation every relationship needs. Even between a father and a daughter. Today, when I look back on everything that happened, I no longer ask myself whether I did the right thing. That question was answered long ago, not in words, but in outcomes. In the way my life steadied. In the way my daughter changed. In the way silence gave way to honesty instead of resentment. There is a version of fatherhood that glorifies endless sacrifice. The idea that a parent should give until there is nothing left, and still apologize for not giving more. I believed in that version for a long time. It nearly cost me my self-respect. What I learned is simple, but not easy. Love that demands humiliation is not love. Support that requires silence is not support. And generosity that erases the giver is not virtue. It's self-betrayal. I didn't cancel $150,000 out of anger. I canceled it out of clarity. I stopped funding a future that required my absence. I refused to pay for my own dismissal from my daughter's life. That decision didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. Victoria is building her life now without shortcuts. Without safety nets disguised as kindness. She's learning lessons I should have taught earlier, lessons about gratitude, humility, and respect. I wish she'd learned them without losing so much. But some lessons only arrive when comfort leaves. As for me, I sleep better. I wake without dread. I no longer feel the quiet panic that comes from knowing your worth is conditional on what you provide. I am still a father. I still love my daughter. But I am also a man who knows where he ends and where responsibility truly belongs. If there is one truth this experience left me with, it's this: you don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. Even family. Especially family. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let reality speak louder than money ever could. Sometimes dignity is the inheritance you pass on, not cash. And sometimes, the lesson that hurts the most is the one that finally sets everyone free. I didn't lose my daughter. I lost the illusion that love means surrendering yourself. And that loss gave me something far more valuable than any wedding ever could. Peace.